Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar with Dr. Maura Summers and Linda Chow. My name is Nubia. For those who don't know me, I am in charge of client services at Silver Oak, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And now I would like to formally introduce the president and owner of Silver Oak Wealth Advisors, Linda Chow.
Thank you, Nubia, and welcome to our very first webinar that we're trying today. And I am hosting this right now in my converted garage. And just as a disclaimer, the guitar is not mine. I don't play it, but there is a piano in front of me that occasionally I'll play. So anyway, at Silver Oak, as many of you know, really our purpose is to work with clients and to create a sense of financial well-being. And that financial well-being is very critical and is also interconnected with our mental well-being, our physical well-being. And during this pandemic time, all of these have been very challenging. So I wanted to bring out actually our very first poll to ask the audience today. Together as a humanity, we've been going through a lot in the last 6 months, and we're still going through many of these challenges. And I really wanted to understand what are the threats that you feel as of now? What is you're mostly concerned about? So Nubia has pulled out this poll question, and we've had these answers, and you can click multiple choices, any that apply to you. Here are the poll results. So as you see, we can see that the pandemic is really such a disruptive event that it actually triggered many other crises and threats for us. So, and this is the reason why we have Dr. Maura to be with us. Dr. Maura and I met, I think in 2012 through Financial Transition Institute, where I started training there. And Dr. Maura is a neuropsychologist, and besides doing research and writing books and teaching, Dr. Maura also has a private practice to work with families and dealing with challenges that wealth can bring. So welcome, Dr. Maura. It's a very big pleasure to have you here. And as you see that, a lot of us are going through these tough times. And what we wanted to talk about is how do we grow out of this chaos and all these events that's happening us? What's strange about this time is even though we can feel physically safe at home, but there's just so much going on around us, and there's this collective suffering and could leave a long-lasting trauma on us and our families. So how do we really pay attention to this and to our own well-being?
I love those questions, and thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I was reminded as we were planning today of this little scene, this adorable scene from Despicable Me. I think many of us who are parents will remember this little scene.
This kind of annoying.
Very.
That question, does this count as annoying? I thought, we'll translate that to, do these count as hard times? And as we look at the poll results that just came in and think about what it is that we've been through in the past 6 or 7 months with the pandemic and some of the forced separation or changed ways of relating that we've gone through, with awareness of how much inequity and violence some of the people that we love in this society are exposed to on a regular basis. As we think about how difficult it is to have civil discourse, how do we relate respectfully and effectively to people that we have profound disagreements with? And as we deal with things like the wildfire and other aspects of climate change, I think that that question, do these count as hard times? The answer for us, very. These are very hard times for many of us. And the interesting thing to be aware of, for me as a social scientist, but also just as a human being, as somebody who experiences the ups and downs of that everybody else does, is this observation that people who go through the very same events, who go through similar hard times, often have really different outcomes. And we can't predict always who's going to be going in one direction versus the other in terms of those outcomes. And indeed, not only is there variation between people, but there's also variability within us, that sometimes we seem to do better than other times. In other words, resilience is not this fixed trait that we're born with. It very much waxes and wanes in response to what we do. And so the question as a social scientist is, why is there that variability in outcome? And is that variability, in fact, something that is changeable from person to person and over time? And most importantly, how can we all invite change for the better to come into our lives, into our families' lives, and into the broader community? As I spend time in the research literature around this, I've come to sort of distill a huge amount of research into 4 basic ingredients that keep surfacing time and time again. Actually, not only in the science literature, but in many ways also in the spiritual traditions that many of us try to learn from. And so when we're looking for sort of the success equation of how do we get through hard times and change for the better, the first ingredient may be one that kind of surprises you, but it turns out that hardship itself is one of the things that we need in order to be strengthened as human beings. This is a quote that I love from Oprah Winfrey: "Where there's no struggle, there's no strength." And I see this all the time in both my clinical practice and in my work as a family wealth psychologist, that sometimes our efforts to protect children from struggle has this really unfortunate effect of turning them into the equivalent of hothouse flowers that they just can't stand up to the normal rough and tumble of human life. And so as frankly horrifying as some of the recent events that we're going through are, we can at least take from that the notion that these do provide us with opportunities to change, to grow, to strengthen, if we come about it right. So we can check off the hardship ingredient, at least in most of our lives. And even if we're not personally directly affected by some of the stuff that's going on, we can open our hearts to those who are suffering and thereby in some ways share it and strengthened by it. Though there is a sweet spot between being a hothouse flower and not having any exposure to the stuff that could kind of put a little bit of steel in our spine versus having too much hardship. And so there is this sweet spot that we're always trying to get to, especially as parents, as people who are trying to grow resilient human beings. There is a sweet spot that we think of as manageable struggle. And the problem becomes when there's so much hardship that we start to feel undone by it. We need to really be careful and be vigilant when it's happening to us and when we see signs of struggle in the people around us, whether those are our clients, our staff, or our family members. In fact, we seem super able to adapt to almost any short-lived stressor that we might face. But the thing that really takes it out of us, and the thing that really begins to have mental health consequences and physical health consequences, are the stressors, Linda, that are unrelenting and that don't naturally give themselves over to recovery time. You know, many of us hit the ground running when the pandemic hit, for example, getting supplies in and figuring out how we were going to re-envision work and making sure that our kids were set up in school. And I guess I sort of thought that this was like putting stuff in my knapsack for a hike that I was going to be on, not of my own choosing, but that I was going to go there. And what it's starting to feel like is less like a hike and more like a pilgrimage that we are going to be on for a long time. And so how do we make sure that there are periods of recovery in that so that we don't find ourselves experiencing some of the things on this slide, the depletion, the burnout, the breakdown, and impairments or undermining of our performance as partners, as parents, as workers. And I think you have prepared a poll on this. Nubia, if you could bring that up, that would be great.
Yes, so we have our next poll here, and the next poll is to think about you or your loved one's mental health. What are the main things contributing to you or your stress and anxiety right now? You're welcome to click more than one answer if it applies to you.
And you should take a drink.
Yes.
Stand up and stretch.
We've been talking about heavy stuff.
We have about another 20 seconds.
I think the loneliness and isolation is the big issue here.
Yeah, isn't that?
A lot of us. And I can share just an example because at the beginning of the pandemic, we decided to quarantine my mom, who is 74 years old and in her own apartment. Even though for some time that she can still come over and visit us for a short time period and even bring food and see our kids, I did not realize how much the isolation really take the toll on her until a month later, she complained to me that she doesn't see much hope and doesn't want to live much longer. And that is a really, really alarming sign of depression to me. And I can imagine there are a lot of people who are vulnerable living by themselves, not able to talk to anybody for days, and in this situation, it can be very, very, very depressing. And so, and even my point is that it could happen to anybody, anyone, at any time, right? Because when all these things happening, even my son, who's 12 years old, and he is usually a very sociable, outgoing kid and have many friends at school. And after month and month of online learning and now engaging for the normal social time, I found that she became less and less interested in talking to his friends. And she is spending more and more time by himself. So these are the things. So I have to really just take efforts to create a more intentional activities for him to interact with other people and other friends, going out. And also I had to take my mom out for a trip and just for all of us to stay together and in nature. We went to Cambria, take a road trip. So a lot of the things that I think we're all experiencing it. And I feel like what you said is the breaking point is not to get to there, the sweet spot. When we identify these early signs of whether depression, anxiety, and stress, we can immediately take actions and address it, intentionally, right?
Well, thank you to all who filled out the poll, and I'm just really struck by the fact that the loneliness and isolation is what seems to have really hit people the hardest. And Linda, certainly those are the two examples you gave from your own family life. If the single best predictor of getting through tough times, it turns out, is social support. Like if you could only have one arrow in your quiver, that's the one you want to put in there. And so the extent to which social networks have been disrupted is one of the big threats that we're having to deal with in the mental health community. And fortunately, this is being recognized, and it's one of these things that, once you know it, you can do something about it. So
Exactly.
let's go on to some of the other ingredients. And I'd specifically like to talk about that recovery piece. So the hardship is actually necessary in our lives, or we won't grow. We will remain kind of flaccid. It's not a very flattering image, but when we experience hardship, we have the opportunity to grow. But we also need to be able to be judicious about exiting the hardship, or at least carving out space during it for recovery. And what might that look like? Or what are the signs that we're needing recovery? Let's start with that. This is my graphic of where our mental energy goes in the course of a day. Our brains are little energy hogs, and they use up 20% of our resting metabolic calories. And part of that is the stuff that's going on behind the scenes to make our liver function and our heart pump and allow us to sit upright in a chair. But a lot of that energy is also going into supporting the functions that you see on this slide. Managing pain and stress, learning new things, forming habits, controlling displays. And in the course of a day, if we've had good nutrition and we've had a good night's sleep, we wake up with a whole fresh pie of mental energy. And the system is designed to kind of work in a very predictable way, such that by the end of the day, we're either running on empty or kind of close to it, but that again, we get restored. And so there is that natural cycle of refilling and depletion and refilling again. But what happens when the stressors are chronic is that the replenishment isn't as complete and isn't as rapid. Often, indeed, because sleep is one of those things that can get disrupted by chronic stress. And so if you're not sleeping, that you don't have a fighting chance to wake up with a fresh pie. Sleep is so critical to recovery. And so part of the recovery process, Linda, is being able to identify and sort of tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient to identify that in fact we are running on empty. There are times when I just don't want to acknowledge it. It really is inconvenient. I've got a lot of work left to do, or somebody really needs me, or I worry that if I stop, I'm never going to start again. But it is critical to identify those signs that we need to stop and take care of ourselves. Here are some of the ways in which we can start to get the signals from ourselves that it's time to happen. When we become mentally depleted, there are changes in our attentional capacity, for example. So either we'll find that we are really distractible and can't seem to settle on anything long enough, or we will be hyper-focused to try to get something done. And when you're in that hyper-focused mode and somebody interrupts you, you know how irritating that is? That can be one of those signs that in fact you should step away from the project for a while. Controlling emotional displays. In normal times, we get to be the ones to decide how much annoyance we would display, or how much sadness, or how much excitability. We may not always have poker faces, but we have a game face, don't we? And we're in control of how much of that emotionality we show and how much force we react with to things. But as we become depleted, we become overreactive. The filters slip a little bit more. For some people, the sign that they're running out of that good mental energy is that they actually start hunkering down. They withdraw because they know they're not as in control of themselves as they might like to be. Sorry, should I go back?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I have some comments after this.
Okay. Another sign that you may be running on empty is that your normal, dependable, happily engaged self is feeling like you're kind of wading through molasses to get stuff done. And indeed, you feel quite half-hearted about doing things, or that you're just letting stuff go. You know, I walked into my house a while ago and I thought, what pig lives here? And I was like, oh, that's me. I just wasn't keeping up with stuff because the normal discipline of putting papers away before I left the office at the end of the day, for example, I was just letting that stuff go. And so each of us will have signs, and they're probably signs that everybody else around us can identify, maybe even before we can. But it's important to tell the truth about what that is.
Yeah, yeah. And I was looking at your chart, Dr. Mora, and what resonated with me, and I think many people here is, if you think about the initial lockdown that we had to go through, for me, it's like there's just so many decisions to make, right? We have to understand how to be more hygienic and where to get groceries. If we have a kid at home, how do we set them up? And as a business owner, you have to figure out like what's going on with the clients, with the staff. And the other thing is, I have to complete a lot of everyday chores. If you imagine, people are losing their babysitters and losing their cleaning ladies and losing a lot of these service stuff that we take for granted usually. I found out that, you know, it's not fun to cook 3 meals a day and doing all this dishwashing and all this stuff. So I become very irritable by these everyday chores. And also have to direct attention on a lot of the new things that's happening around us. So I found that during that time, I was just mentally exhausted after days work, even though physically I could be just sitting home all day long. Yeah. And it was depleted very easily during those times. And I have to really combat that and compensate for that by sleeping more and doing more meditation, yoga, and all my, you know, restorative and replenishing activities. Even just going to the backyard and having 10 minutes of sunlight, you know, sitting there and watching the birds, you know, just those things. Like I found myself doing a lot more during the initial time, and that's because of the depletion of energy.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've had so many people, like patients who had been discharged from my work because they were recovered, they were better. And they began to sort of straggle back into my practice over the past few months, Linda. And one of the reasons for that was that for many of them, the normal things they did to cope with the stress, all of those really good habits that they'd formed in order to have improved mental health, some of those coping strategies just weren't there anymore, right? So if their main source of coping was to be going out with friends or to be going to church or doing volunteer things or going to the gym, and suddenly they're barred from doing that and have to reinvent new strategies, it takes a while to get replenished again.
Yeah, you have to be creative.
You have to be creative, yeah. And again, creativity is hard. That learning new things and forming new habits becomes harder when we are depleted.
Because that also takes a lot of energy.
It does. You know, habits are awesome because once they're formed, they save us energy. Yeah. But the process of forming them, you know, that it's kind of a front end load on our energy. I'm just going to zip through some of these things we looked at earlier. To just note that if there's one sign that you're running on empty, it's this one. This is the most reliable sign for most people, is that we feel things more intensely than is usual for us. Mm. And that can be either in the positive direction or the negative direction. You know, videos of cats riding on vacuum cleaners have us in hysterics. A minor transgression from our spouse or our child will have us responding as though we just found them dismembering the family dog. Like it's just, we're just much more feely when we're depleted. So just to be aware of that, that if there's anything that you might notice as an indicator that you need recovery, it's this. If it goes on too long, you tend to get the opposite, which is that you stop feeling anything. We see this a lot now in frontline workers who have just been working around the clock in certain settings, is that they're so spent, they have trouble feeling anything anymore. They just haven't had any recovery time. But before you get there, you tend to have this heightening of emotional reaction. And so making sure that you have recovery, even if you're still in the midst of the hardship, involves things that are both momentary and a little longer lasting. And the quickest, most direct route to changing our own brain metabolic activity is simply to breathe. A few moments of intentional, breathe in for the count of 4, hold, breathe out for the count of 4, hold. That exercise is an immediate reset and helps the autonomic nervous system to just say, okay, I can come off duty for a moment. Pausing, unclenching, taking these little times like Nubia suggested in the pool, when there are these moments of 10, 15 seconds to stand up and just change position and breathe. It helps to reset. Obviously, if you can take a little more time and engage in more substantial recovery, that's really going to grow your pie again. But don't dismiss the power of the moments to do some of these things. The third ingredient for growing through hard times is positivity. In fact, it's really hard to overstate this one. It's not just that the most resilient people, the most anti-fragile people that we come across happen to be more positive. It's that there is no resilience in the absence of positivity. You can take the best exemplar of human strength that you can think of, and if you reduce their ability to look for joy, to assign meaning, to experience gratitude or silliness or any of the things that might fall on the positive emotion chart, if you prevent people from accessing those things, their resilience starts to fall off quite quickly. But similarly, you can take people who are very, very distraught and low and not in a good space, and if you teach them basic practices to increase the amount of positivity they're experiencing in the day, you will start to see strengthening and growth in fairly short order. And so I'd like to, ask the folks on this call to think about, for you, what word or phrase best captures in your mind the opposite to this notion of depletion? What is the word or the image that brings to mind this overflowing, this fullness, this abundance of well-being? This is a picture that I took several years ago from an exhibit in downtown Montreal. It was an international competition of living sculptures, Linda. And the competition, every country had to show their country's creation stories. And this was Canada's. This is the creation story that comes from our Indigenous people about the notion of Mother Earth and Turtle Island. And for me, I mean, I can't tell you how big this was, bigger than a football field. And just to see that overflowing of life was so beautiful to me. And it's something that I think of when I need to get into that state of replenishment again, when I'm aware that I've been depleted. And so I'll ask the folks on this call to just jot down a few ideas about not only what are the images that might help you experience an automatic influx of positivity, but what are the behaviors that might invite that? Now, a caution about this, as you think about what enables you to be in that state of replenishing, if not replenishment, the caution is that we need this to be real. The old, cheer up, don't mope, you should be grateful for, you should look around and see all of the things that are going right in your life. If it's that may all be true at some level, but if it's not moving our heart, it actually isn't moving the needle on recovery. So if your thing is escaping for a little while in a young adult fantasy novel, or if your thing is going and throwing a boomerang around your backyard, or if your thing is getting out wool or fabric or flowers and exulting in the colors and the textures, then that's your thing. And that's what it is that will start to strengthen you. This isn't an indulgence. This is one of the key ingredients to growing through hard times. Linda, you mentioned that piano that's in your office right now. Is that one of those love to do or ought to do activities? What happens for you?
Yeah, because I found that playing a musical instrument can really get you to the flow experience very quickly, because it's very difficult for you to think other things where you can still having the smooth playing of the music, right? So it's almost you have to be present for that moment. And another thing I do is actually to be in the nature and just to look at the trees and be, with the plants and seeing the ocean or anything that's nature. Staying there for a couple hours, I feel very different after that. So last weekend, we had this really bad air quality because we're suffering from these wildfires. And I just took my mom and the kids and going into a botanical garden that literally shaded with the trees and with the creek. And, and after 2-3 hours, I felt like, I can breathe again. and they have a good time with me. So, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting that you brought up the nature, because it does seem that is one of, again, if we're looking for quick pathways to recovery, because the stressors are still all around us, or we might just be going through a time where we really have to get back at it very quickly. There are some things that do seem to offer us quicker bangs for the buck. The breathing that I talked about earlier is bar none the fastest. But time spent in nature seems to pack a disproportionately positive punch. So thank you for reminding me of that. Creative endeavors, when, if you can pull out the pens or the fabric or the paints or the music, that also seems to really bring some of the recovery along much quicker. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that buffers us the most from hard times is social support. So the extent to which we can continue to cultivate our social network will be one of those big predictors of how quickly we can recover, or how well we stay without becoming depleted. It can keep us filled depending on the nature of the relationship. As I said, sometimes we end up withdrawing from socialization, certain people, and that's a necessary thing if they're the kinds of people who tend to take more out of us than they give. It's not that we need to cut them off, but that sometimes we need to cut ourselves off from being accessed 24/7 and really be intentional about the time that we're taking away in that isolation period.
Yeah, and I think this experience also taught us who truly matter in our life, the kind of relationships that we want to nurture and bond, and this gives us the opportunity to do more of that.
There has been some interesting research, I don't know whether you've seen any of it, on something called the positivity ratio, which is the number of positive events we have in the course of a day versus the number of negative ones. And we know that we do have a positivity bias as a species, that on average, we tend to report twice as many positive experiences in the course of a day as negative. Something magical appears to happen, according to the research, when we hit positivity ratios of 3-to-1 as individuals. We seem to be, when that happens, we start to tap into new levels of capacity in terms of creativity and output and even thinking styles. And when we get to 5-to-1 levels of positive to negative emotional experiences within family or work teams, that's when you start getting the happiest teams or families, the most profitable and productive teams with the greatest customer satisfaction ratings. So when you think about a ratio, you can affect it by either increasing the number of positives, or if you're just really exhausted and the thought of finding something else that's positive in a day just is overwhelming to you, you can also do what I call a negativity audit, which is to look at your life and say, what have I been putting up with or doing without or making do with that perhaps I don't need to? So if you've, been suddenly thrust into working from home and you don't have, and you're working on a chair that's leaving your back in agony at the end of each day, perhaps it's a good idea to say, I could increase my positivity ratio by reducing my physical pain. And the best way of doing that might be to get a better chair. And so you can you can experiment with getting to more positivity overall by doing one of those negativity audits. The best answer I ever got, by the way, from somebody that I sent away to do a negativity audit, she came back with and she said, I need more pants. I put on weight and I wasn't going to let myself buy any new clothes till I lost it. But I tell you what, it's really hard to do my best work when I can't breathe because my pants are too tight. So sometimes when you allow yourself to tell the truth about what you might need and you actually give yourself permission to get it, things change. Sometimes what you need to ask for is permission to is changing relationships even. Sorry, Linda.
Yeah. No, even to say, like you said, even small little things that can increase the moments of joy. It is still worth doing it.
Yes.
And also, I think it's important for us to notice the positivity.
Yes.
A lot of times we don't pay attention to it when things go well for us. I have a habit of journaling each day in the morning to notice what are really going well for me and for my family and for the world. So dropping down a few things, even small things like, well, today the weather is really nice. You can enjoy this Southern California weather, and this is so fortunate. It just brings the good mood to you. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I live in central Canada in Manitoba, which is the province with the polar bears. So when you said you had a piano in your garage, just like, wow, that is so different. The only musical instrument I could have in my garage is maybe a drum or something I can hit. So yeah, noticing the positives, and maybe if people could use the chat box, and Nubia could help us out later, you know, what do people do to
Actually,
increase their awareness of the positivity, of the positive things in their life? Or
right.
what have they been finding that they need to address in order to affect that positivity ratio? I'd love to hear about that.
Right. And Nubia, don't we have another poll to see how people are actually able to do during this pandemic? Here we go.
Yeah. Because of this pandemic, I am, or my family is, able to blank. Choose all that apply. We're looking for the positives that the pandemic has brought.
Look at that. A lot of us able to connect more with the family, friends, and neighbors. And this is the gift of time and gain more clarity on what matters in life. That is huge.
Yeah. You know, when all other choices are taken from us, the one choice that we still have is the ability to choose our reaction. And a big part of that, turns out, is looking for meaning, right? Finding purpose or assigning meaning to what's going on. And that's, you know, I just love that those are the bookmarks of this poll, you know, that the social connection and the meaning are kind of driving the positivity of the people who answered this poll. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, yeah, this is great.
And so as we come to the end of my part of this presentation, just wanted to share that the fourth ingredient in growing through hard times is, okay, you need the hard times to grow through, and you need to be looking for recovery opportunities, and you need to be infusing positivity into the day on a regular basis. And then when you're sort of thus filled up again, you actually need to build yourself out a little bit more, strengthen yourself in this kind of virtuous cycle, so that it's not enough to just kind of get to status quo. You want to be building the capacity to do things even better. And we can build upon resources that include what we call human capital, what it is that, how it is that we relate to people, our intellectual capital, what it is that we know how to do and would like to learn about, our social capital, who is there for us, and at various levels, who has the shoulder to cry on, who can point the way to something that would be helpful to us, who will bring us the casserole or pick up the groceries when we otherwise can't. And financial capital, because that matters. And one of the ways in which we can bring meaning out of these hard times is to look at how it is that you can strengthen your family's relationship to money and around money. This is my list of my take on the top 10 things that modern families need to know how to do. That everybody in the family needs to be developing these skills. And these are, if you look over this list, Linda, you'll see that these aren't one and dones, right? Like they're the task of a lifetime. Think of that first one. How many people through the pandemic have come to realize that they seriously need to upgrade the marketable skills, because what they did before the pandemic appears to not be the thing they're going to be doing afterwards. And so to be having these conversations in family about what does it mean to keep skills upgraded, and how do we do that if funds are tight. So as we end the webinar today, I would love for you to help us out, Linda, in talking about what role money plays and all those other forms of capital play in well-being in general?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and we've been exploring a lot with our clients we work with. And we know that wealth matters in a way that it gives options, it gives a comfortable lifestyle. And during this pandemic, so many of us are appreciating our beautiful homes and able to bring food on the table and to provide for be provided for the best healthcare and all that stuff. But I think money can only get us to a certain point, because what also matters is what you talk about, the other capital, is our human capital, our social capital. And these things are equally important and equally important to teach our next generation how to build them. Because at the end of the day, when we are really, really in a crisis, what we can count on are the people and our intellectual curiosity, our learning ability, our adaptability. So these are things that are most important for us to develop. And at this point, I also wanted to direct a little bit to our audience because I've seen some comments and I want to share a few questions here. One person shared that my issue is overwhelming workload. We're very busy, along with no boundaries between work and personal. I'm working all the time. So this can maybe resonate to a lot of people who are actually found themselves even busier during this time because they're more demand for their services and for their work.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, setting the boundary between work and personal?
I was looking for you to tell me. Because my thought was, I hear you, sister or brother.
I have one tip for that, because have a separate space, and really almost like walking into an office and leaving the office. I have a clock here because I could easily get into that trap as well. And even during the weekends, I could be finding myself checking emails and doing stuff. Is to have this kind of self-discipline with the clock and saying 6 o'clock, it's time for me to go back and to have a dinner, to do other things. So it takes some effort, but I think the first thing is noticing that, right? Noticing that is impacting us, and then take some actions to change that habitual behavior.
Yeah, there are lots of things that come to mind, and I love the idea of tripwires, that we just set this, when this happens, then this. And so whether that's the deadline at the end of the day, like we used to do pre-COVID, when 5 o'clock happens, I am on the train, or when 6 o'clock happens, I am walking out of that office and shutting down. I think that one of the things that can come out of this is a better work-life balance, if you can believe it. Like, because right now I know that, I'm almost having trouble not rolling my eyes at myself as I say that. So I can bet there's some people rolling their eyes at me right now. But really, when you think about it, this is what we have to do. We have to kind of sharpen our elbows and say that if I can't be my best self for you, for my boss, for my clients, for my patients, if I am ragged. I made a mistake while I was in that, not me, I'm not tired, no way, I can keep doing this mindset. I made a mistake that I hadn't made since I was a rookie. And that was my wake-up call. And my encouragement to people is try and catch that before you make the mistake. When you notice that either your emotions are really amplified, or that you're starting to throw overboard some of the stuff that you really shouldn't throw overboard, like patience or empathy, that it's time to shut down the computer and or to put the extended absence, or to put on the answering machine, my office hours are, I will get back to you when. I've had this fact that it is possible for us to be available 24/7 means that we're getting kind of weird as a society. I've had patients leave the office because they realize they left their cell phone in the car, and what if the kid's school needs to get hold of them? They can't even go to an appointment without being accessible all the time. Like that's too far down the road of being available. And so to sharpen our elbows and to claim some time back that isn't work, and if you're an employer, to really take this on as a leader, to say, what are your employees doing? And are they taking the breaks they ought to be? And are there boundaries? Creating psychologically safe workplaces for people to work in is part of what we need to be doing right now.
Exactly, exactly. I received these beautiful comments from the audience. My wife and I start every morning presenting gratitude and saying the people and the circumstances we're grateful for. It's beautiful.
What a lovely morning practice.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if we have time, but I'm seeing more and more questions here. I would love some suggestions. This is interesting on how to deal with the political anxiety and the election. I think that's weighing a lot on all of our minds. It's a very emotional topic.
Yeah, I think learning what one of the opportunities we're getting from that particular hardship is the awareness that entrenchment isn't doing us good, to be fully entrenched and realizing that nobody's influencing anybody anymore is the opportunity side of that, is that we can start learning ways of conversing with people that we disagree with. Like there's never been a better time to be learning that. There's also, instead of feeling that you're victimized by it, a willingness to deliberately expose yourself to it. So one of my friends, instead of only listening to the news that he agreed with, every day now he deliberately exposes himself to news from a source that he hates, and he's finding that he's becoming less reactive. It doesn't get his back up to the same degree. Ultimately, I think we have to again choose to turn it off, to recognize that it is not part of citizenship requirements to be a victim of the 24/7 news cycle, and to be able to step away from it a while and really determine where it is we want to put our efforts and our activism.
Yeah, yeah. So we're getting to the last 5 minutes of the webinar, and I think that Dr. Mora, you've shared a lot of wisdom with us, and I really appreciate your information, and I think everybody gained some insights from this talk. During this time, what I would like to say to the audience is that I encourage all of us to continue spending our most valuable resources, our time and our money, with intention and purpose, to really create a fulfilling experiences with our loved ones. This is a time to really bond with the family and friends and enjoy some of the time together, and also to support the causes we care about, since it brings us so much clarity to our life and what is really important to us. And we continue to support you and to serve you as your thinking partner in the times of change. And this is, as I said, it's the first time we do the webinar. And let us know the feedback, and so we can make it better for you. We're planning to host more in the future. That is topics related to investments, related to financial organization, and some other things. So we'll keep in touch with you. And Nubia, is there anything else that you're seeing we need to address before we depart?
Yeah, let's take a look here. We do have a few more questions, but we will get back to you. We're out of time. Just to remind everyone, this will be recorded and will be sent out to all attendees. However, if anyone is interested in Dr. Mora Summers' slides, please reach out to Silver Oak, give us a call in the office, and we will get those to you as well.
Have a lovely day, everyone.